Hi, this is Sandy from Spitfire's Customer Experience team, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at Kepler Orchestra. Looking in the Instruments folder of Kepler Orchestra, we can see that we have 7 folders containing the different sections, including a warped section, which doesn't have a specific instrument and has lots of unusual effects applied. Looking inside each of these folders, we can see various different instruments, as well as a subfolder for the stereo mix versions. The main folders have separate microphones, and the mix versions just have the one signal. You can load any one of these instruments by double-clicking it. I'll load High Strings Grid. When you first open any one of the instruments for the first time, you'll be presented with one of our handy little help bubbles telling you that you can find out more about a section by clicking the small eye icon, such as here next to Signals or here next to Controllers. You can click the cog to close that help bubble, or even say don't show any more help bubbles if you know what you're doing. If you're familiar with any of our Evo Grid libraries, you'll probably be quite familiar with this interface, as it looks very similar, but there are some important differences which I'll point out. Much like our other Evo Grid libraries, we can see an XY grid, where the Y, or the vertical axis here, represents the note centers, which you can see written on the left-hand side. And along the right, instead of individual evolutions, we have different rhythmic subdivisions, and these are all grouped in 2, 3, 5, and 7, as represented along the top here. So for each colour, such as red for tuplets, or blue for triplets, yellow for quintuplets, and green for septuplets, these are arranged from slow to fast, going from left to right. You can select a particular rhythm for a note center by simply clicking on it on the grid. You can also select a rhythm for the entire range by command clicking on it, or control clicking on Windows. If you click one particular point on the grid, and then hold Shift and click another, it will draw a line directly from one to the other. So if I command click on the farthest left here, we'll have the slowest of the tuplets assigned. Let's hear what that sounds like. Comparing that with, say, the fastest of the septuplets, you can hear it's quite a difference. For this library, unlike many of our others, we've used Kontakt's Snapshot option. This allows you to call up a different preset arrangement of the grid and the various other controls in the UI without reloading the instrument. To do that, simply click this arrow here and choose one of the snapshots. For instance, quintuplets. You'll see that the grid updates, and so do some of the controls. Let's hear what this one sounds like with the same MIDI. Along the bottom of the grid, we can also choose the individual volume for each of these particular rhythms, so if you find that one is too loud or too quiet, you can adjust it relative to the others. We can also control the pan, and whether this particular sound gets sent to our effects, which are over on the right here. To the right of the grid, we have our signals, which if you're familiar with any of our other libraries, should be reasonably familiar to you. You can adjust these by clicking and dragging up and down, and enable or disable them by clicking on this power icon underneath each. This will add them to or remove them from memory. Clicking on the letter for that particular signal, you can choose different outputs from Kontakt as well. So if you're using a multi-output or surround version of Kontakt, you can send the different signals to different outputs. To the right of our signals, we have our controllers, which again should be reasonably familiar if you've used any other Spitfire library. We have a dynamics control, which is also assigned to our mod wheel on our keyboard, or CC1. We also have expression, which is a simple volume trim. This allows you to adjust the overall volume of the sound without affecting the dynamic layer. In between these two, we have our quantize input control. By default, this is set to 1/8, or a quaver. Dragging it all the way left will switch it off, and dragging it all the way right will make the quantization more and more fine. Depending on which setting you choose, this will quantize the incoming MIDI so that the different rhythms will play in time with one another. So for instance, if I set this to quantize to 1/4 note and then play a note, the note won't actually start playing until the next available quarter note in the sequence. If you have a rhythm set up which makes use of very small subdivisions into 7 and 5, adjusting this quantize input can actually have quite a dramatic effect on the sound. So I'd recommend trying adjusting that with some of the more complex rhythms and seeing what it sounds like. If you're finding that a particular note seems to be coming in a half beat late, try changing it from 1/8 to 1/4 note. Under these controllers, we also have some general controls for attack, decay, sustain, and release, which will affect the overall volume envelope of the sound. And if you've used any synthesizers, these will be familiar controls to you. Attack is the amount of time it takes for the signal to reach its loudest volume from 0. Decay is the amount of time it takes to reach the sustain volume from that attack volume. Sustain is the overall level that it will sustain at when held, and release is the amount of time that it will take the sound to die away after you release the keys on your keyboard. Underneath our signals and controllers, we also have some effects controls for the 3 different effects built into this library. We have a lush reverb sound. You can adjust the overall send level and return levels for this effect, as well as adjusting the pre-delay and size, which will give a different impression of the size of the room and how close the sound is within that room, respectively. Underneath this, we have a tape delay effect with various controls for time, dampening, feedback, and an overall return volume, and a really nice tape saturation for adding a little bit of warmth and distortion to your sound. Here we have gain, warmth, and a high frequency roll-off control to adjust the tone. If you make some settings in this interface that you'd like to keep, you can also save these to your own snapshot by clicking the little floppy disk icon next to the snapshot options. Clicking here, giving this a name, and then hitting save, will add this to your snapshots. You'll see now that we have our factory snapshots as well as our user snapshots. This can be handy for finding your own presets, or going back to the ones that we give you with the library. The nice thing is that your user presets are saved in a different location, so they'll never be overwritten by one of our updates. The interface and behavior is more or less the same for all of the different instruments in the first 6 folders in this library. The warped folder contains completely different instruments. These ones are named after celestial bodies, such as Callisto or Titan. If we load up one of these instruments from the warped folder, we'll see that it has a very different interface. This is more like a synthesizer control, and the interface is called the Mercury Synth Engine. On the left-hand side, we have a control for our 1 signal, again where we can unload it and load it from memory, and choose which output that's sent to. We have controls for a low-pass and a high-pass filter under the heading envelope here. The low-pass filter will remove high-frequency audio from the signal, and the high-pass filter will remove low frequency. We also have those familiar controls for attack, decay, sustain, and release of the volume envelope. And underneath that, we have a portamento control, which we can enable here, and we can adjust the time for here. This will be the amount of time it takes to glide between one note and the next. If you've used any of our eDNA instruments, you might be familiar with wobbles. Wobbles are essentially low-frequency oscillators. So we have these for volume, pitch, and the filters. You can click and drag up and down on one to increase its speed or its frequency, and then click and drag on the fader for the amount to choose how much that wobble will affect the sound. Let's hear the sound with none of the wobbles applied. And now let's apply all 3 wobbles at different speeds so you can hear the quite extreme effects these can have. You can hear that these can all have quite a dramatic effect, so you probably wouldn't want to set all 3 to 100% like this. To the right of our wobbles, we have our MIDI yoke. This allows you to make MIDI assignments for 2 different CC controls and have those assigned to different controls within the interface. So if you've got like an XY controller or a joystick on your keyboard, this can be a very useful way to control 2 different effects at once. To make an assignment, click first to the left here and choose whether one of the effects or the CC that you wish to control, and then from the submenu on the right, choose the second option. So for instance, I could choose that I want to control EQ3, frequency 1, or gain 2, and then that will be assigned to this X control. The default assignment is that the Y control on CC1 is assigned to Dynamics. To assign a MIDI hardware controller to one of these controls, or to any of the other controls in the interface, simply right-click, choose Learn MIDI CC Automation, and then move the fader. You can also remove MIDI automation from here as well. Along the bottom, we have our effects. These are an EQ, low-pass filter, chorus, delay, reverb, twang, convolution, and phaser. For any of these, you can command-click or control-click on Windows to see further controls. For instance, our reverb has controls for pre-delay, size, colour, dampening, stereo width, and then dry and wet volume controls. You can click back to get back to the main view. When you enable any of these, you'll see that the icon becomes darker, and disabling them, it will become transparent. Again, just like all the other instruments in this library, we've made use of Kontakt snapshot options, which you can access from here, and you can save and delete your own snapshots from this menu too. And now we have factory and user snapshots. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at spitfireaudio.com/support. Thank you.